next 40 days of Lent here at Salt House, we want to put into practice a more honest spirituality. We'll do it by exploring a way of living that has led to remarkable healing and transformation, the kind Jesus taught us. It's a global movement fueled by humility and grace lived in beloved community that began in the 1930s. It's the 12-step recovery program, as articulated in the so-called Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The 12 steps are a practical way for individuals in regular meetings and with the support of a sponsor to live and work through addiction. It began with alcohol, but today these same 12 steps are used across the globe for dozens of addictions, from codependency to hoarding, compulsive eating to workaholism, as well as groups for family members and loved ones. These steps work. If you're newer to the 12 steps, here are 2 things you need to know about why we'd spend Sunday morning sermons exploring the 12 steps. First, the message of Jesus and the 12-step message are largely the same message, which we'll see each Sunday. The second, the 12 steps are for all of us because we all have our own substances and behaviors that we seek out to cope. They bind us, which is the root of the word addiction. We can become bound to lots of things. Food, control, we worry, we overwork, overplan, over everything. There's alcohol, pot, scrolling on our phones, shopping, sex, exercise, so many things. These things can be good to comfort, soothe, and help us, but they can cross a line when they become unhealthy for us. The New Testament calls them our demons, those things we reach for that have such control over our lives, our behaviors, and our actions. The 12 steps can be used for any unhealthy coping tool, anything that we use to avoid trauma or uncomfortable feelings. And it begins by admitting we are powerless. In step 1, I can't. Then we're open to a power outside of ourselves that will restore our sanity. In step 2, God can. In step 3, we make a decision to hand our lives over to the care of God. It's the moment of open-handed surrender. I think I'll let God. And then we keep dancing the open hand 3-step waltz of I can't, God can, I think I'll let God. As the steps 4 through 12 open us to vulnerable self-work, making amends for the harm we've caused, practicing prayer and contemplation, and a rigorous honesty with self for ongoing health. So friends, what binds you? What are your demons? What do you need to let go of? Let's open our whole selves to God now. For Lent at Salt House is I can't. Steps toward a more honest spirituality.
Oh, friends, hi. Hi, I'm Sarah, and I am powerless to being good enough, and my life has become unmanageable. So as I shared 2 Sundays ago as we kicked off this series, this is kind of my I can't. My fear of being the bad thing that drives me to do a really good job on all the things, to control things when I can, even like looking at, okay, what am I eating? How am I exercising? Let me shop online for a little bit. How does that control who I am? Like ways I deprive myself to always try and make things better. But I can't actually make myself good, right? There's never gonna be a point where I'm like good enough because I am powerless. I'm powerless to that. I can't, but God can. So this is what we're asking of ourselves this Lent, to say, what is your I can't? We mean it when we say that this Lent we are on a journey to the cross, an empty tomb of Good Friday and of Easter that is intended to be a journey together into a more honest spirituality. And I don't know of a better way of living this in practice than through the 12 steps. Like honest spirituality begins with admitting our powerlessness. And as we've said the last 2 Sundays, it's not that we're working the 12 steps exactly as they are intended to be, because you need to, like at a minimum, attend meetings and have a sponsor for that to be true. But we are letting the wisdom and spirituality of the 12 steps show us what is possible and try them out in practice. Even just getting through the first 5 steps, which is as far as we've gotten so far, I'm just blown away at how these steps just resonate. They echo with what Jesus meant when he said, come, follow me, yes? So today, we are also putting into practice one of our core practices here at Salt House. We have 7 core practices, the things we actually do together that are central to just what we value in following the way of Jesus. And the core practice we're practicing today is sharing stories. We believe that stories matter, that we are here to show up and share our own stories, that we are here to witness to each other's stories, As we do, we'll see both, like a bit of ourselves in the other person, as well as see and know something and someone that may be a bit different than we are too. And that we'll also hear the story of God in each other's stories as we learn about God's story in the Bible and how the story of God is our story. And so today we have a Salt House story. We put front and center on a Sunday morning a chance to hear the story from someone in our Salt House family. And so today, Dean Robertson is with us. I mean, he's often here on a Sunday, but he's like here on the microphone this Sunday. And Dean has lived and known these 12 steps. Dean, as he is now, he likes to think and reflect deeply. He likes to notice like how we work, how the world works. If given the choice, he doesn't want to dabble in small talk, but he gets like right to what really matters, what's good and hard and beautiful and heartbreaking about these precious lives that we have. So Dean is going to skip the small talk with us this morning. He's not going to try to dazzle us with his humor or try to get you to like him. But Dean is just going to get right to it and share about astounding pain and the grace that has found him. Dean is vulnerably showing us what it can look like to live with a more honest spirituality. Not that he's done or that he has it all figured out, but Dean is daring to share about things that are often held in secret, secrets that can breed shame. And Dean told me that he's sharing so honestly because too many of us live in these secrets. And the invitation of Jesus and the journey just specifically of Lent is one where we let God's light shine into us, exposing all the dark corners and hidden parts of ourselves. Nothing is off limits to God. And that shining light brings not judgment, but God's mercy and acceptance. It's the prayer of the psalmist in Psalm 51. I'm going to have you read this with me. Okay, I will read it for us. But that it would just kind of set and frame our time together. So this is Psalm 51, 1-3 from the Message. Generous in love, God, give grace. Huge in mercy, wipe out my bad record. Scrub away my guilt. Soak out my sins in your laundry. I know how bad I've been. My sins are staring me down. We've all got the bad record, the guilt, but we do not need to live in shame. As the psalmist cries out, it is God who meets us in grace and in huge mercy. So can you try something with me? Can you let yourself in this moment, close your eyes if you'd like, just feel the persistent warmth of God's acceptance? Can you let yourself sense that in this moment? Like let it be here and present for you. And can you take that warmth and direct it toward Dean, who's sitting over here in the front? Are you feeling that for him? Can you let that warm delight just be how you see him and receive him today? And now, while maintaining that for Dean, also let that acceptance of God just wrap around you. God delights in you exactly as you are. All the things you've done, all the secrets or hidden pain or trauma that you hold, the identity you've hidden, it's all here and it's all held. So now, with these conditions set for us of warmth and love and acceptance, we welcome to the Salt House microphone our own Dean Robertson and his Salt House story.
Hi, my name is Dean. I'm 52 years old. I have ADHD, and I'm a healthy 5 and 4 on the Enneagram. I have an amazing wife, 2 incredible children. Right now, I'm feeling really nervous, vulnerable, and scared. In my life, there have been many life-changing moments and moments where God spoke to me. But in 4 of them, God spoke to me and told me to stop everything I was doing and set forth on a new path laid out for me. I want to tell you what led up to those times, how I surrendered to God's will, and the things that happened after each time. 3 of those times happened close together in my mid-20s, and the third when I was 51. Persona is the stage mask we create to hide who we really are. It's our bogus story. Personality is partially inherited and partially created early in life. It represents our ego. It's our public story. Our essential self, our true self, it's our private story. I'm going to tell you a part of my private story. I'm hoping that parts of this story might resonate with you and give you hope that your secrets might not need to remain secrets. Addictions are nothing but symptoms. They're trauma-based symptoms rooted in insecure attachment. I have insecure attachment. I have trauma. My father left with little explanation when I was quite young. I was 4 years old, to be specific. We were living in Lake Stevens, Washington at the time. It was my first attachment wound. My father wound is based on abandonment. I had been this innocent little boy when my father left, and my reality got ripped apart. As a child, the fear-based theology of the 1970s that I was exposed to added to my trauma. The church preached light and encouraged the use of the rod to beat it into us. The church experience left me very ashamed, afraid, and confused. When I was 8, I moved to Germany with my mom and my new dad, and that created a new attachment wound of separation from friends and all that was familiar. My attachment wounds created distrust for anyone outside of myself and prevented me from seeking wisdom from my parents or anyone else. The safest place I could find was inside my own head. I bottled my emotions, and around age, they began manifesting in twitchy tics and self-injury. Around that time, I discovered masturbation, my first addiction, which helped me process many of my overwhelming emotions. There's nothing wrong with masturbation and exploring oneself, but I took it to an extreme in an effort to not have to feel unhappy emotions. I also started hitting and bumping myself into things, enjoying the little dopamine rush the pain gave me. My early acting out behaviors carried me through my mid-teenage years. By the time I was 18, that wasn't enough anymore, and I started an extremely unhealthy way of processing, and I began cutting myself. It was very upsetting to me, and I didn't understand why I was doing it. Eventually, the self-injury didn't meet my needs anymore, and new, more hardcore addictions came to my rescue. I was in so much pain that I gave my power over to them willingly and wholeheartedly. I embraced them to the extreme. I begged them to carry me away from my pain. I became addicted to methamphetamine, heroin, alcohol, fighting, and sex. I can honestly say the drugs, alcohol, and sex saved my life. Those addictions were so good at numbing my emotions that they took away all the painful thoughts I was having. If I'd not found those crutches, I believe I would have committed suicide before age 20. I wish I'd had someone I trusted that I could have talked to about what I was going through instead of using the very harmful soothing methods I chose. My active drug and alcohol addiction lasted off and on for 6.5 years. I had a love affair with the needle and the bottle. I'd completely lost touch with my essential self and given my power to the demons that lived in my head. I'd hit bottom for the first time. Then something new happened. I received a divine intervention. When I was 24, I distinctly remember one night standing on a freeway overpass at 2 a.m., high on meth, watching the fast-moving traffic below me, pondering, what if? That scared me. The church told me I'd go to hell if I commit suicide. As I stood there, I started to think to myself, what the hell happened to me? Growing up in Europe, I was labeled as different. I was a foreigner. I twitched. I was weird. But I also found lots of healthy ways to entertain myself nonetheless. I spent a lot of time learning about birds and archaeology and so many other things that were interesting. I thought about all the amazing experiences I'd had growing up in a foreign country and traveling extensively. I'd experienced a lot already for somebody as young as I was. I wondered how after all that did I get so screwed up. I pondered all of that standing on that freeway overpass that night. It was at that exact moment that I heard God speak through my heart for the first time that I was aware of. I was instructed that I needed to go on a quest for sobriety before I ended up dead from a drug overdose like so many of my friends. The message was so convincing I didn't dare say no. So I quit my job, checked out of the hotel room I'd been living in for the last 6 months, put my few belongings into a small storage unit with the rest of the stuff I'd collected in life, and hit the road. It was not my first road trip, but it was my first intentional quest. I was in pretty poor shape from all the drugs, and I only made it as far as the next city to switch to their drugs of choice. From the extensive use of the powerful drugs and alcohol, I was pretty much emotionally void for the most part. There was so much pain and horror in the homeless culture that I popped in and out of during that 6.5-year period that I didn't want to feel anything. Long story short, after 6 months of city hopping and nonstop substance use, I hit another bottom and involuntarily found myself in a small town jail in the Olympic Peninsula. Going to jail was always scary. Especially in the big cities where the gang presence is overwhelming within the confines of the walls. However, this was a small town jail and was really mellow and actually pretty boring. My fears were unfounded this time, and in an effort to find entertainment, I started going to the rec room and Bible studies and AA meetings to relieve the monotony. The AA meetings always had coffee and tea available, which was nice. Being a smoker, not being allowed to smoke in jail was not easy. I started stealing all the tea bags from the AA meetings, and we would smoke them in our cells at night. One time the guard caught us and told us we were fools and forbade us from ever smoking tea again in his jail. I don't remember what I'd heard in the stories people told, but something in those AA meetings resonated with me, and despite not being able to smoke their refreshments anymore, I continued to attend them. After being released from jail, I found a very supportive community in the small town I was in. I actually managed, after a meth relapse and a 2-month alcohol binge, to successfully quit drugs and alcohol. In early sobriety, I relied heavily on cigarettes, coffee, chess, and sex as substitutions. I didn't really understand the 12 steps or the program, and after working on my 4th step, I ended up firing my sponsor after a disagreement, just white-knuckling my sobriety. I became what's called a dry drunk. A dry drunk is someone who is not actively using but has not stepped into recovery by doing the work. When we quit doing what's not working, then we enter recovery. This was about 1 year into sobriety. Emotionally, I was still in a cognitive fog. The first year of withdrawing is always rough as you learn to stand on your feet again. It was at this point that I heard God speak through my heart again. I was told I needed to go on a quest for knowledge this time. Once again, I gave up everything I had going for me and hit the road. I hitchhiked and rode freight trains all over the western United States seeking answers. Along the way, I hit more bottoms within the substitutions I was using and felt a desperate need for a revelation. It was at that point of resignation that I discovered the Alaskan wilderness. I heard God speak through my heart loud and clear. I was told to give away everything I owned in that storage unit and walk into the wilderness. At this point, I had a pretty good amount of faith in following God's directions, so that's what I did. I gave away everything I owned but 2 bags of camping gear. When I stepped into the wilderness, I did not know I was stepping into transformation. I lived outdoors year-round in the Alaskan wilderness for 3 years. I lived in an old-growth forest, nearly identical to the Hoh rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula. The trees were ancient and the mountains surrounding me massive. I shared the forest with deer and brown bear and ravens and eagles. It was a rainforest, and it rained there almost every day. Sometimes it would get cold in the winter and snow. Have you ever heard the sound of falling snow in the absence of all other sound? Everything changed for me there. I went through my first spiritual awakening, a spiritual transformation. I had believed I was going there to escape society and civilization. There was so much pain in the world I'd lived in, and without the drugs and alcohol, it was really emotionally overwhelming. In the wilderness, There were no social threats or pressures, no persona to maintain, no conditioning, no norms I was shamed for if I did not fit the mold. The defenses I'd maintained in daily life melted away in the solitude. Eventually, it was just me, naked in front of the mirror of myself. It was the moment I saw who I really was. I wept when I saw my imbalance. I thought back to the innocent boy I'd been before my father left. Now I was full of darkness. In my newfound vulnerability, the Spirit began to work its wonders. The chains were ripped from my heart, and I was set free from my bondage. Life burst out of me, and I came alive. I began to thrive. At first, the transformation was confusing. I didn't know transformation was possible. I didn't know how to recognize it. I only knew that things were changing, and that was scary. But knowing I was on a faith-based quest, I maintained course and learned to silence the noise in my head and hear what God was saying. It was God's moment to pour his wisdoms into me through my open heart. The light got brighter. I could finally see. When I eventually came out of the wilderness, I went to my first AA meeting that I'd been to in years. The world had become a very bright place for me. I thought I was cured and I didn't need the anonymous programming anymore. I walked away from it. I was very young and naive and still believed that the world served me. In my wilderness experience, I did not realize that a tiny little speck of darkness survived. It was the size and the shape and the color of a small black seed. As time went on, that seed slowly began to grow. It grew so slowly that I did not notice it. When I returned back to civilization, life there disturbed me. I felt like I'd failed myself in my desire to leave the pressures of society and the natural destruction our species inflicts on our planet, on nature. Our first cathedral, where all our ancestors worshipped. Our people would gather around the primal fire and drum and dance. Today, I barely know the names of my neighbors who live just a few feet from me. I got depressed, and in my late 30s entered my midlife crisis. My Enneagram 5 personality combined with my childhood safe place drove me back into my mind. I did not know how to express these feelings to my wife, whom I just recently married. I struggled to have meaningful connection with anything and poured all my emotions into my art and building a business from scratch. In the failing communication between my wife and I, we ended up putting kids first and marriage second. We did not have a healthy marriage. These things were enough to maintain me, but did not give me fulfillment. I began to realize that something had changed inside of me. The brightness I remembered I had gotten much dimmer. My wife wanted to meet me where I was at, but I did not know how to invite her there. I retreated more into darkness, and our marriage suffered. 13 years later, the pandemic came as a blessing. It snapped me out of my rut and started me on a quest for self-care. There were many very distinct stepping stones and crossroads that I encountered along the way. First, I came to understand the meaning of self-care. Then I entered personal therapy, and also my wife and I started marital counseling. I started engaging in church again, and then the Salt House men's group sprang into life, and it rocked my world. I had no idea men could share vulnerability. On the streets, you got shamed for showing emotion. Here, men told story and hugged and cried. The demons who loved the darkness within me were challenged, and they became nervous. There was a brutal battle in my head, and it left me bruised and cowering. In this period, a year ago, my heart began speaking again. It was muffled and hard to understand this time. All I gathered was that it spoke of change. But nothing prepared me fully for what happened next. 9 months ago exactly, the Spirit spoke directly to me in my second spiritual awakening. This time I was in a new kind of wilderness. I was in the wilderness of my emotions. God told me very clearly what I needed to do. I was told I needed to become honest and re-enter the 12-step program and do the work. I denied God 3 times, but finally accepted what I was asked to do. I sought guidance from the elders on the matter and got their approval. See, my pride had taken over, and it loved the 27 years of sobriety I had, but I was in denial about not being in recovery. My pride was broken that week, and I was knocked off my high horse. I fell face down in front of all the pain I'd ever felt, and I embraced it. It was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. I recognized the shadow self, my self's emotional blind spot, which had returned, and I knew it was because I'd never done the work. In the spiritual awakening, I saw my shadow self, but also discovered my essential self on the deepest level. I learned to embrace both sides and created balance in my life. It gave me the stability to step into the work and started with the first step of admitting to myself, my higher power, and another person how my life had become unmanageable. I had to talk about how the darkness had returned and how I was not living up to my end of the bargain in my marriage. Doing that step was very, very hard. I had to write it out and read it to a group of people. I cried the whole time I was reading. I've continued on with the 12 steps, and I've been working very diligently at them with the guidance of my sponsor. The 12 steps cannot be done without an experienced sponsor. Parallel to working the steps, I'm also doing the deep shadow work with the aid of several therapists. In that work, I have to enter my dark cave, face my shadow self. Other times I enter the dark cave and face the demons that have been screaming lies into my head my whole life. One by one, I'm revisiting all my childhood traumas and bringing them to the surface. My inner child is trying so hard to protect me from having to feel emotions. It begs for me to act out in one of my old addictive patterns so it can keep me safe from having to feel those uncomfortable feelings. My inner child does not want to hurt. I have learned to meet my inner child where he's at and give him what he needs. Sometimes it's a hug. Sometimes I need to tell him everything's going to be all right. Sometimes I tell him that we're actually grown up now and we can handle the situations without having to hide from them anymore. I have shed innumerable tears in the last 9 months. Each time I do one of the 12 steps, each time I address a trauma, each time I vanquish a demon, each time when I meet my child self, each time the burden I carry gets a little lighter. In the 12 steps, it speaks of having a spiritual awakening and sharing what one has learned, giving away the gold you've earned, you could call it. The men's organization, Illumine, I'm now part of, believes strongly in giving away your story for others to learn from. The founder of Illumine, Richard Rohr, is a very firm believer in the program and the 12 steps. They are woven through the entire fabric of its existence. Today, I've given you my story. The opposite of addiction is connection. Secrets have no power over you if you speak them aloud. The only story is your private story. I know addiction is a very private story filled with shame and fear, but I invite you at any point in time to pull me aside and share your story with me if you feel so compelled. I will embrace you with no judgment. I am Dean, and this is my Salt House story.